Hello, welcome to Pick Date again, where we get trashed and talk about all your favorite books.
It's not
and
true.
By your favorite books, we mean the books you love and the books we hate. And
Not true. Welcome to our 2023 wrap up, where we'll go through our best and worst of the year.
I had a banger of a year. I looked when I was making the list. Even for me, I'm pretty harsh, and I was having a hard time narrowing it down. Well, it's also because I'm taking into consideration, like I mentioned before, that most people only read about 4 to 8 books a year. And even if I was to put that number all the way to 8 and be the most generous as possible, it's still gonna be hard for me to just do 8 alone.
Yeah, no, I feel like this year I had more books that I didn't finish than ever before.
And then at the end, we're also gonna say our number 1 book of the year.
If there could only be one.
If there can only be one.
If
And
this
by
year-
God, if it's FourthWing, I am going to blow a gasket.
I'm scared.
Yeah.
I'm in danger.
Yeah, I need an adult
Spoiler alert, it was FourthWing.
for both of us.
All right, let's get into it. Okay.
Mine's a smoke today.
By the way, guys, what do you think of our Christmas tree? We are now officially out of the office and we are in our living room this time.
All right, let's start off with the positive. The best books you've read this year. You go first.
I feel like we brought this up every single time.
You're gonna start off with that?
Yes, because I just finished Iron Flame.
How did she come out with 2 books that big in 1 year?
I know, right? Off the top of my head, first things first, my favorite thing I read this year, which let's start off strong, is FourthWing by Rebecca Yarros, followed by Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. So this is a fantasy series that came out this year, and this is the first one. The second one, I'm sure most of booktube is kind of tired of hearing about these books.
I'm tired of hearing about these books. I'm currently through a little more than halfway through the second one. Not actually enjoying it that much as much as the first one, which, to be honest, I did enjoy the first one. But in all honesty, seriously, 2 massive books like that in 1 year, those things are written by an AI. I guarantee you, they're written by an AI. ChatGPT wrote those books based on all the things that all the girls like.
Their thing. But anyway, I actually really enjoyed Iron Flame, maybe not as much as I enjoyed FourthWing. I can see where it suffers from too many plot points, too many things going on, and not enough execution on, the lore behind it.
Feels like one of those books that you need scantrons just to keep up with like all the characters and their characteristics and all that
there's
stuff.
a lot of stuff that hasn't connected to each other yet, but I'm sure watch the third one come out like in January and we're like, what?
I'm surprised they haven't announced it yet.
I know, I've been watching out for it. But either way, these were such fun reads, some of my favorites that I read of the year. Again, if you've never heard of FourthWing, basically fantasy series, dragon riders, dragon school, war, all the good stuff you like in fantasy with some steam.
Just a little bit of steam. Not too much. It's
But
basically
anyway.
a steamboat. It's a steamboat.
We'll do our hot take on Iron Flame once he finishes reading.
Hot take. No, in all honesty, do I think that book is really, I've mentioned this before, that book is not written for me. It's not written for, I don't really think it's written for the male audience, but I have to give it to her. There is a reason why that book is so popular. It's because the audience that it is trying to service, it is doing it to a T. It is doing it probably better than almost anyone else. And that is why it has been the top book on pretty much every single app, at least in my app, for the past, since it came out, since it basically hit.
It's been a while since there's like a series out there that's just everything fun and different and I don't know.
And spicy. I'm just trying to say that I also kind of put my stamp of approval on it. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that is of the same audience that I am. I wouldn't recommend it for them, but I do have to say that if you are a part of that audience, I think honestly you're almost wasting your time if you don't check it out. Because it probably is the best in a while.
Exactly.
My first book that was really good this year was 4 Winds by Kristin Hanna.
You finished that one?
Yeah, I finished that one. Awesome book. Not super in love with the ending. Basically, the book.
You finished it.
Yes. Why are you so surprised?
Sorry.
I finished a book. I can finish a book in like 2 days.
Sorry. I keep interrupting. Go, continue.
You're so insulted that I don't keep you up to date onto every single one of my reading. Anyway, so The Four Winds, which honestly I get confused with The Four Wings, whatever. Anyway, The Four Winds is basically the story of a woman and her life during the Great Depression and a little bit leading up to that. Basically, she is not really loved by her family, ends up getting pregnant very early on in the book, and then has to go and live with another family that is not as well to do. And it's basically just about the struggles of that time period of people living in Texas. I don't want to go too much into the book, but it's basically a Hallmark movie if they were good. Not super in love with the ending, even though I probably knew that it was gonna end in a sad note. But overall, the book written extremely well. It's very mature, and it's honestly something that it taught me was that you can have a romance and you can have the innermost thoughts of a character involved in a romantic situation, and they don't have to get so gynecological, like on FourthWing. I'm looking at you, FourthWing. Okay. I liked it.
Did I not prepare you, not tell you that if you're gonna read Kristin Hanna, expect for just sadness and suffering?
Yeah, but it mixed in there, the few moments that are happy are just so happy. So it's nice to read about one of those books every once in a while to remind yourself that, you know, the world is not just, you know, dragons and steamy romances and, you know, the Roman Empire in space. That's foreshadowing.
But what can't the world be? Steamy romance and dragons and space and fantasy. That's what I read for.
Next.
All right, next, some sci-fi, fantasy.
I would say sci-fi.
Crossover.
I would say sci-fi.
Red Rising. This was a surprise for me. Typically, when Gia tells me that he really likes a book and that I should read it, I kind of like read it just to get through it because we definitely have different tastes in what we want to read. But I actually really did enjoy this, so good job. Good job. You read this one as well this year.
This is actually one of the books that I think you should read, including one of the series that I think you should read. This whole series is a trilogy, and I actually think that they get way better as it goes along. But yeah, I really like this one. Basically, the basic premise is, like I said, the Roman Empire in space with the main mixed with like Braveheart, basically. So the Roman Empire in space mixed with Braveheart. That's actually like super close, super grandiose, but like a lot of like life lessons, a character that is really going through it. It's really hardcore, and the tone and just the characters and everything. And I'm also talking about it because I've read the entire series. I am shocked that there's not a Netflix series based on it already, or some kind of TV series or some kind of movie.
When
it
did
is
these come
prime
out?
for it. Another thing that I really liked about this series is that I'm not a big fan when a writer tries to essentially write an action sequence by describing every single movement of the character, especially like a fight sequence, like his arm went here and then his other arm went over there and then his elbow got twisted and I landed on his neck and something. It's like, it's really hard to follow. It doesn't really come across on the page. You basically have to do this mental gymnastics just to follow on whatever gymnastics are actually going on in the story. So in this one, and even more in the other books, he actually just talks about how the situation is feeling. He describes an overall description of what is happening and then what the characters are kind of doing, but he more goes into the feeling, into what it resembled, and that comes off the page way better than essentially imagining like a Twister game in your head. Another book that is super guilty on, and I know I'm going off on a rant, but it's actually just something I don't like in books, it's actually FourthWing. And if you listen to the audiobook like I did, the reader of FourthWing, the audiobook is fantastic, but what she tries to do to make the action sequences more engaging is just read it faster. So it actually just exacerbates the problem even more, because now you're getting all this like movement information, but you're just getting it faster and it's even less gratifying. Like it's just bad. But anyway.
So this was on your best of list as well? Best
Oh
of
yeah,
the year?
the whole trilogy. I would put the whole trilogy. So it's Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star.
Definitely readable. Like the third quarter of the book kind of dragged a little bit for me. I felt like it was just more of the same was happening, but it was still so great. And the beginning really just grabs you from the get-go and brings you up and tears you down immediately, and you're just like, what did I just get myself into? So highly recommend this series. Well, I've only read this one, and hopefully in 2024, I will complete the series. How did you think about the Roman Empire? And he's like, all the time. So another standout of the year was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. We both read this one as well. I just haven't read a book in a really long time where it was hard to predict the ending. It was suspenseful. And then at the end, I just like cried like tears of like sad happiness. It's been a really long time since one book can make me feel so many different things. And the pacing of the story was just fantastic. I think we talked about it in
the spooky episode, I think.
Right, that was my recommendation for spooky season. So give this one a read. Riley Sager, I've started to read more and more of his books, and so far, this is by far my favorite one. It was just all hands down great. I gave it a 5 stars this year. So what did you give this one?
That's actually one of my honorable mentions.
There you go.
I'm telling you, man, my list is banger after banger after banger. And although I thought this one was good, I didn't think it was anything that really stood out. And that's why it was just one of my honorable mentions.
Exactly, which is why, like I said, this year was kind of mid for me. In 2022, had I read this one, I don't know if this would have made it to the top of my list. But this year, the competition wasn't too stiff for me. So either way, still a great book.
So the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This is another one that I think you would like even more than Red Rising because it is fantasy, but it's also a little bit more character driven. It's a little bit more heartfelt. It's a little bit more, has a little bit more drama in it. Has a little bit more triumph in it. The Red Rising saga, it's a little bit kind of like those FourthWing books that it is a kind of a lot of suffering. Amazing fantasy series. If you're into fantasy and you're not reading the Stormlight Archive, I don't know what it is that you're reading. But yeah, Stormlight Archive. The books I read this year were the first one, which is The Way of Kings. Words of Radiance is the second one. And then I read that 2.5 installment, Edge Dancer, also amazing. And now I'm on Oathbringer. All books are like 50, 55 hours of listening, massive books. I have no idea how Brandon Sanderson writes this much, makes books this thick, and that do not feel like any moment in them is wasted. He is like a savant. I have no idea how he does it, but thank God he is.
So another of my absolute favorites this year was a book called Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleeton. I technically don't have it with me because my mom is reading it and she is taking forever. We went over this book in length in our five-star reads of the year so far back in August. So won't go into too much detail, but again, it's called Next Year in Havana, and it's about a girl whose grandmother has passed away, and her grandmother's last dying wish was for her granddaughter to return to her homeland of Cuba and scatter her ashes. Again, it's a fantastic novel. It's got romance in it, historical fiction, and Guy and I being Cuban, there was a lot of just personal connection with the book that I absolutely loved.
I think honestly the best way to probably put that, it is kind of like, in a weird way, it's kind of like a coming home story, but it's also kind of a coming home story for you as well. So I think that's why that book kind of hit you so hard, is because the character's coming home, but you're also in a way going home with her and seeing the place for the first time as well.
It's just a beautiful depiction of Cuban American history and what Cuba is like right now and the relationship our country has with them, and dealing with Cuban people living in Miami, still, having family in Cuba, and just the struggles that we're kind of facing right now.
Okay, next up, probably the best standalone book that I read, and that's A Man Called Uva. It's basically the story of an old curmudgeon man in his neighborhood, and basically the interpersonal relationships between him and the rest of the neighborhood. It is an amazingly heartwarming story, something that a lot of people relate, especially if you're someone that's a bit old-fashioned. You're really gonna appreciate this book. It's basically your average old curmudgeon guy just complaining about the world, just waving his fist in the air, telling everyone to get it off his lawn. But you really read the book and you're just like, damn man, he kind of is right. They really need to get off his lawn. If you're one of those people that think you have an old soul, you're probably gonna like this book.
This was also part of my best of year, and we went into depth in this one in our 5-star reads of the year so far, which we'll also link below. So watch that video and you'll get our full take on a lot of the books that we're mentioning here a little more in depth. So technically I'm still reading this one, but it's definitely some of the best of the year. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the prequel to the Hunger Games series by Suzanne. Let me tell you, I forgot how much I love the Hunger Games until I started reading this one again. And now I'm kind of like, I need to go back and reread the series and watch the movies again.
The Hunger Games or FourthWing?
If there only could exist one, the Hunger Games.
No, the Hunger Games was spicy.
I already said the Hunger Games.
No, but what if the Hunger Games were spicy?
Then I wouldn't have been allowed to read it when I was in middle school. This universe is just as bleak as it is. It's so fun and interesting. Really enjoying the story. I am halfway through, like chapter 18 to page 266, and I can already tell you, like, I'm just gonna fly through this. I'm hopefully gonna finish it by the end of the year. We have, 3 days left? I want this to count as part of one of my 2023 reads. But this is so great. The characters are just jumping off the page, and it's just reads so well. Like, I remember just tearing through the Hunger Games, and this is no different. Suzanne Collins really knows exactly what she's doing. She's very immersive and just flying through the book.
Next up, this was actually an honorable mention, but on the fly, I'm gonna make it one of the best books I read this year. A book you hated.
No, I didn't hate it. I just didn't enjoy it as much as
It's
you
okay.
did.
There's a lot of books you read that I hate. It's okay for you to hate one of mine. So anyway, so that's the Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon. But it's basically this gothic mystery set in Barcelona in the 1940s. And it just mixes in like a lot of culture, and it just, the atmosphere that it sets is so amazing that it almost makes you forget about how pretty much the first half of the book is a little bit pointless.
This book is too long for its own good. I just can't believe how much exposure we've given this book on this channel so far. I feel like it's been mentioned in every single...
Are you complaining about it? We've given FourthWing so much exposure.
Yeah, but it was well deserved. This book, the only reason we've talked about it so much is because it took me so dang long to read it. So in every single video we filmed, I was still reading this book.
Yeah. The way I would describe this is that this is basically...
We've already described it a million times.
Well, the reason why you don't like
on this book and that's it.
Okay. It's like a really, really nice culture documentary on Spain, but it is kind of dull, and that's why she didn't like it. But if you appreciate history, if you appreciate culture, if you appreciate atmosphere, and you're willing to just wallow and dwell inside of a slow-moving story, I do think that this book pays off.
This book had a terrible ending. I wasn't even gonna mention it.
I don't know about that. I think the ending was pretty good.
I came into that office and I told you what was happening, and I was shocked, absolutely shocked, that you liked this book after reading what happened to the love interest.
Okay, it's kind of like, let me see if I can describe to you. It's kind of like a paella. You see, if you just kind of focus on how good it smells and
I don't
how
want
it
to talk
looks,
about this book
you
anymore.
can kind of forget that the majority of the ingredients in it might just not be so great. All right, my next book, The Good Earth. It's a book about real life, about basically, I think it was in the late 1800s in China, this farming family trying to get through kind of their version of a Great Depression. It's a book about real life, real people in that culture trying to get through it. I would recommend that book to anybody that's into history, into historical periods, and learning more about other cultures and other countries that you might not know about.
So another great book I read this year was Happy Place by Emily Henry. Emily Henry books are definitely hit or miss for me. I do look forward to them every year. She's like the author that has that kind of cover that's very minimalistic. Her books are really hit or miss for me. This year is actually a hit. I don't think I've liked one of her books this much since like the initial Beach Read, which is my favorite Emily Henry. Happy Place was just a really great summer read. As always, her writing is always fantastic. It's like butter, it flows, it's super smooth. The characters were really great, really liked them. The main character I actually related to a lot. She's a big people pleaser, but the book was centered around her relationship with her friends and her ex, and it was just a nice book to read in the summer. Liked all the characters, even if their convictions were a little bit questionable, but overall, fun read, and definitely my favorite Emily Henry book that I've read besides Beach Read.
So I've actually seen that the majority of the male reading audience, the majority of the books, the genre that they center around is actually like self-help books or self-improvement books. Surprisingly, I'm not really that into them, but I do have one that I did come across to me and I did feel that was a little bit exceptional. It's a book that probably a lot of people have read by now. It's not really new to this year, but that's 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. That book actually stood out to me. I feel like there was a lot of information in there that I grabbed that was actually new, even though I've been listening to Jordan Peterson for like a really long time. But I just really like how he has these 12 rules for life for himself, but he also shows you where he got them from, whether it's from psychological studies or from lived life experiences.
Proof in the pudding of why these actually work, kind of thing.
Right, exactly. And he actually even goes back to historical texts. A lot of the rules that he comes up with actually have basis in historical texts, right, and shows you that not only should we be doing that now, but people have been doing that since forever because it kind of just works. So anyway, Jordan Peterson, do I think it would change your life? Possibly. Okay, honestly, these books changed my life, and this is the main trilogy that I read this year out of the 3. This is my favorite one. I've talked about it a ton, and I do honestly feel like these books were life-changing. As a person that loves sci-fi, these are probably the best sci-fi books that I've ever read. That's the 3-Body Problem series, or actually it's called The Remembrance of Earth Past or something like that. Anyway, the basic premise is the human race makes contact with an alien race. The alien race is hostile and they're coming over to Earth to take over in 400 years, and it's basically the story of the Earth civilization for those 400 years. Just goes into all this like ideas about human nature and ideas about how we act under stress and the way that our civilization and species kind of progress as they evolve. Even though it is probably my favorite series of all time at this point, even after reading Game of Thrones, even after reading all those other series that I love, I can't recommend it to everybody because it's extremely hardcore, a very impersonal story, and because of the fact that it is treating the entire human race as the main character, it doesn't technically just focus so deeply on one person and their personal feelings and their personal problems so much. Anyway, next up, 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This is probably one of the best mysteries that I've read in a long time. It is almost like a mystery set in Inception. So it's like a mix of a mystery. Imagine if Inception was not a heist movie, but it was actually a mystery, like a murder mystery, mixed with like kind of like a Clue vibe. So this book was amazing. It's kind of a head scratcher. Anyone that's into mystery, I would recommend it. The only thing I didn't like about it is that the ending is one of those just pulls the answer out of a hat on the last minute, and there was no way for you to figure it out. So anyway, enjoy the ride, enjoy the head twisting mystery of it, but do not try to solve it. You will end up disappointed.
This book was such a mind twisting turn. Like I couldn't keep up with it at some points, but I liked it. I didn't like it as much as he did.
Oh god. Anyway, now on to honorable mentions. Do you have any? Or do you just talk
Happy
about
Place was kind of an honorable mention because it wasn't necessarily one of the most amazing books I've ever read, but I definitely enjoyed it. It was one of the more enjoyable books that I read this year.
The Coddling of the American Mind, basically just a sociology book about how people are actually getting more mentally weak as we progress as a society. Good Omens, very cheeky, very charismatic tale of an angel and a demon trying to stop the apocalypse.
There's a series of that one.
Yeah, and written by Neil Gaiman. Next up, Breath. It's kind of a self-help book, but it's more of a self-improvement. This book actually kind of changed my life. Basically, it's about how the United States and the developed world is kind of turned into mouth breathers, and how bad breathing through your mouth is for your health. Like, you should really be breathing through your nose. And because
for a second I thought you were talking about like a fiction book and the monsters were mouth breathers.
No, this is a non-fiction book.
I missed it.
This is a non-fiction book about a man that basically he goes through this long journey of studying the effects of mouth breathing, of breathing through your mouth, and basically tallies up all the negative side effects of breathing through your mouth. And as a former mouth breather, I can honestly say that this book honestly helped me in a lot of different ways. And it also goes back into all the historical reasons why people have begun to breathe more and more through their mouth. Like, it's like a ridiculous amount, like 30-40% of Americans now breathe through their mouth instead of through their nose, which is really, really bad for your health for a multitude of different reasons. And he also goes into all the different reasons why people are doing that more and more these days.
I did not know you read that.
Yeah. And that's why I started breathing through my nose instead of my mouth. You know how everybody was always telling me I was a mouth breather?
Mainly me.
Yeah, correct. But honestly, it even helped me with my snoring and everything.
Yes, it did. Wait a second. You read a book about
mouth breathing and how bad it is for you. Yeah, pretty much. I'm telling you. Honestly, this might be the most important book that someone reads this year. I'm not joking, dude. And then, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This girl makes a deal with a demon / the devil something and basically gets to be immortal, but no one can ever remember her as soon as they look away from her. Very, very, very nice book. Leaves you with a really warm feeling. Loved the ending. I just kind of wish it would have been bigger. I wish it would have been a little bit more epic. For a person that basically lives through hundreds of years of history, she really has a very small amount of involvement with it.
I liked it. That was my favorite book of last year, hands down, and one of my favorite books of all time.
And then lastly, All Good People Here, kind of like this murder mystery. This journalist goes back to her hometown to solve a murder. It was actually kind of interesting. If you like true crime and all that stuff, I actually really like that book, even though I'm not really into that genre.
How many books did you read this year?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
More than you. It is a competition. Now on to my favorite part of the video, the worst books.
You start, because you have a lot more than I do, mister.
These are the books that I kind of wish I would not have spent my time reading. All right, so first up, and what you just said actually brings me to why I really didn't like this book, and that's Fractal Noise. It's kind of like this a sci-fi book about people discovering a planet with some actual alien life on it, and there's this massive geological object in it that they are trying to investigate. It's kind of one of those sci-fi books of an expedition into a hostile environment. The issue with it is that it hits on a lot of very hard-hitting existential topics about like the meaning of life and all that stuff, but doesn't actually offer any answers or ideas into it, and it kind of just ends. Next up, How to Sell a Haunted House. It is exactly what it sounds like. It is two siblings trying to sell a haunted house after the passing of their parents. The issue with that book is that I just didn't find it that entertaining, and I really, really liked the first one written by that author, and this one was just kind of disappointing, and I just didn't feel like it was worth reading because...
Grady Hendrix.
Yeah, because it just kind of followed the paces. You kind of saw where it was going. It was an okay ride, but I just don't think it was worth spending the time
Underwhelming?
on. Yeah, it was kind of underwhelming. Yeah.
Speaking of that, this wasn't the worst book I've ever read, or one of the worst books I've ever read, but because I love this author so much, it was just disappointing, and so that disappointment, that underwhelmingness, just kind of made me not like it. Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, one of my favorite authors of all time, fantastic. This book was just kind of, I don't know, boring. How can you compare Malibu Rising to something like Daisy Jones and the Six and the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo? You can't. Basically, I don't even remember what this book very much was about, but I know it had to do a lot family drama. That's honestly about it. It was kind of boring.
All right, next up. We talked about it previously. Tomorrow. It was a book about three people and their journey through game design and their relationships to each other. Did not like it as a person that played video games. I found it underwhelming when it came to touching on the subject of video games, and I didn't really like any of the characters, and the book was very, very bland. Do not recommend it.
We do have a video where we go through Goodreads most read books of 2023, and we kind of touch
on some of
those books kind of in depth, and we'll link it below.
Next up, Poverty by America. It's basically this social political book about poverty in the United States. The reason why I didn't like it is because it basically is just the main character spewing all of his ideas on you, which is okay. Most books do that, but it kind of offers almost zero recognition of the other argument on the other side of the aisle. So that's why I kind of didn't like it.
Next up for me, this is a book I didn't even finish. I am literally 100 pages in and I couldn't. Twice a Quinceañera by Yamil Said Mendez. Because we're Hispanic, I really read a lot of Hispanic themed novels this year. This basically was a girl who, she broke up with her fiance 1 month short of her wedding day, and she decided she's turning 30, so instead of having her wedding, she's just kind of turning into another quinceañera or quinces, which is typically the 15th birthday of Hispanic girls. We have a huge party.
Is she still 16? Or?
No, she's gonna turn 30, so it's twice a quinceañera. Like, she's gonna be a quinceañera again, instead of having her wedding day, a big birthday party, and she's twice a quinceañera because she's 30, so quinces times 2. Thought it was gonna be great. Thought it was gonna be a cute little palate cleanser, something that I can relate to, because our wedding day is 10 days away, but still, my quinces was still the best day of my life so far. So I really thought I'd relate to this book, and it was just so boring. The character's so dry, so cheesy, so corny, so not well written that I just couldn't. Maybe one day if I'm really bored, but probably not. Moving on.
Moving on. Book we read early on in the year. It is The Measure. It is basically this book about multiple different storylines of different people in modern day life, but the twist to it is that everyone in the world finds out exactly how much they have left to live, and drama ensues.
That was really one of the worst books you read?
Yeah, it was completely, it was such, so the book starts off with such a major plot point, as in like the whole world is different now, but we're just gonna focus on these 5 people's problems. Also, you're telling me that everyone in the world found out exactly how long they have left to live, but the world kind of just kept rolling along?
Not really. There was huge changes.
But there was no wars, there was no civil unrest, there was none of that.
There was a lot of civil unrest.
There was bureaucracy at best.
And a lot of discrimination.
But it wasn't this, if that really happened, trust me, the entire civilization would almost shatter. Like it is what I'm trying to say is epic premise, and not an epic story. Yes. It was extremely, like, it just did not match up. How do you, seriously.
There were certain aspects of that book that were
the ending was very nice.
Great.
I gotta admit, the ending was actually very heartfelt. It was nice. The ending was very nice. But I like I said, such an epic premise, and yet such a minute, small story focusing on like a few different
There were certain aspects to that book that I found completely riveting, that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what would happen. Short stringers is what they call people with shorter lifespans, not being allowed to be into the army and stuff like that. I thought that was so...
Right, but it would have been so much more interesting because the story then centered just around average people dealing with that issue. It would have been much more interesting if you had stories centering around political leaders trying to deal with this, around scientists trying to deal with this, around people trying to like stop it or change the situation. No, instead, it still ended up being just the personal dramas of everyday people living their lives with the backdrop of this massive worldly event.
The author should take it and run with it and create like a series.
Correct, yeah, and focus on people that are actually involved with the actual major event that is happening, like, not just, it's just, average day life with this minute quirk. It's like, no, dude, just show me the other crazy things that are happening.
Right.
Anyway, so that was it. Next up, Love Pamela. It was very, very short. It's the Pamela Anderson autobiography.
Why'd you read that?
It was short and it was there, and sometimes I run out of things to read, and it was available to borrow immediately. I didn't have to wait. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. Not honest, but the reason why I got it is because this is kind of one of those, maybe this person is not who you think that they are, right?
She was exactly
what that decision, which is why it was very disappointing. Like, you honestly read, like you read the autobiography of like a rock star, and you expect that they're gonna be like a certain stereotype, and no, it surprises you because this person shows you all the other different facets of their personality and their life and all that stuff. And no, honestly, you read the autobiography of Pamela Anderson, and she is basically exactly
who you think Pamela
Anderson is.
This was the first book I read this year because Barnes & Noble said it was the best book of the year of 2022. So I was like, don't have to tell me twice. Lessons in Chemistry. Oh my gosh. What a letdown. What a disappointment. This is supposed to be the best book of 2022, and I know a lot of people liked it, but why? Okay, so I kind of went in a little bit of depth in our last video, the most read of 2023, why I didn't like this book, but this is set in the 1950s, a woman trying to, have her career. She's kind of battling a lot of those facets of feminism that we all know about from the 1950s. I just don't think it was tackled in a good way. It wasn't realistic to me at all. It was kind of as if you dropped a modern thinking woman into the 1950s, and then she's struggling, obviously, with the cultural setbacks and societal setbacks that she has as a woman. But it's like a woman in the 1950s wouldn't have the mindset and the expectations of what life is today. They would kind of be more complacent to what's going on because that is their reality. Or a little bit more
understanding.
Exactly. It was as if they took a modern day girl and dropped her into the 1950s and she just expected the world to kind of bend to her. It's like, no. Like, it just, I don't know. I feel like this could have been tackled in a different way. I just didn't like it, and the characters were so dry. I get it, that was her quirk. But didn't like the characters, didn't like the plot, didn't find it believable. I couldn't empathize, so I don't know. I read the whole thing because I gave it its fair shot. While it wasn't written terribly, it's just, there was not really anything I liked about the book. I think I gave it 2 stars.
Trust by whoever the author is. I'll put it right in. Trust. Basically, it is this mystery book about the life of this financial executive or investor pre-depression and then after depression, I think it was. And it is basically the mystery of him and his family. It was a complete waste of time. There is a mystery to it and almost this twist that you see coming a mile away, and then even when the twist happens, it's not even revealed in this bombshell way. So it's, I don't know if it just expected you to see it coming and not even care. And so you basically just end up reading this fictional story of this fictional character that was written extremely well and extremely in depth to the point that you do feel like it was a real person, but the story was just kind of pointless at the end. So yeah, Trust, I thought it was a waste of time. I don't think you should read that one. And then last but not least, I'm Glad My Mom Died. Did not like that book. The book is basically the life of this child star and all the issues that she had with her mother. It is your typical child star that is in a way used and abused and then grows up to have some maladjusted behavior, but in a way she is making fun of her maladjusted behavior, exposing all of it that is in some ways disgusting and despicable, and you end up just thinking like, you don't think this is okay, but you're still writing about it, you're still profiting over this maladjusted behavior, so in some way you're almost glorifying it. So I thought that book was almost morally reprehensible.
My last one is a book I literally just read like a week ago or so, because it's Christmas time and I always like to pick up, a Christmas themed novel in December. Last year I read In a Holidays by Christina Loren. That was fantastic. Like, I wish I could erase that book from my memory and read it every December because it was so great. Again, 2022 was a great year for reading for me. This year I decided to pick up The Santa Suit by Mary Kay Andrews. This was such a short little novel that by the time I realized I didn't like it, 10 pages in, I'm like, there's another 90 pages to go. It was so boring and it was so predictable and it was so not exciting and it was just so... Mary Jane found a Santa suit in the house she just bought, and then she meets her neighbors. And then she falls in love with her neighbor in 2 weeks, and now they're gonna be together forever. And guess what? He wore the Santa suit for Christmas. I don't know. It was just very, 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 very boring. I got to this point and I was like, okay, yep, I get it. I see where this is going. Okay, done.
The number one book you would recommend that you read this year, if you had to tell anybody, this is the one book I think you should read this year, what would it be?
Next Year in Havana.
Whoa.
Yeah,
that
was
is
just
a surprise. Why is it better than all the other books?
Well, obviously my personal connection, and I know that all of our friends and family would have the same personal connection. So if I am referring friends and family book, that would be it. But also it's just an eye-opening depiction of the relationship with Cuba right now that I feel like everybody will appreciate and like to learn about. It's such a beautiful story. It's so beautifully written. Cleeton is now one of my favorite authors of all time. So not every 5-star book that I read is one of my favorites of all time, but this book, Next Year in Havana, has become one of my all-time favorite reads. So for that reason, yeah, that has to be hands down the book I recommend for the year. Because I love Fourth Wing, but that is not on my favorites of all time shelf. Yeah, no, not yet.
I'm gonna let you guess my book that I would recommend.
Stormlight Archive.
Nope.
Man Called Uva?
That's right. I would recommend A Man Called Uva? Yeah, Uva. I would recommend A Man Called Uva simply because were there books that maybe I liked more? Possibly. Were there books that made me cry almost twice on the bus? Not really.
Except for Uva?
Except for Uva. No, I would honestly recommend that book because I think it's just a book that almost everyone would like, and it was also maybe my favorite book, my favorite standalone book of that year. And I just think it's most applicable to a wider audience. Not everyone is into fantasy, not everyone's into sci-fi, but this is just one of those books that everyone can read and everyone can get something out of it. It's almost like one of those summer reading books that they would give you in school.
But that you would actually like?
But that you would actually like. Now that being said, if you're into hardcore sci-fi like me, yeah, The Three-Body Problem probably will change your life. And if it doesn't, then we just can't be friends.
Alrighty guys, thank you so much for joining us. This is the last video of the year, and hopefully 2024 brings a lot more fantastic reads and a lot more of you guys joining our community. Thank you so much. If you are a new subscriber, we have really appreciated, we started our channel, in like October. Yeah. We've had a lot of fun connecting with a lot of you guys. So very grateful for this little corner of booktube that we have kind of made ourselves this year. Really excited to see where 2024 takes us and how many more of you guys we get to kind of meet online and to start connecting with and really sharing all of our opinions on books. I love talking about books with you guys online, so really grateful
also,
for that.
If anyone's read The Three-Body Problem, all three of you out there, if you could please comment.
He's trying to find his people.
I need to start a three-body book club.
Three-body book club.
Yeah,
that doesn't sound right. Maybe rethink the title.
Anyway, thank you for watching. We'll see you next year.
See you next year, guys. Cheers.